Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I'm on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters, both new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. This podcast is also proudly presented by T&K Hunting Gear. If you haven't heard about T&K, then it's about time you do, everyone. I've been using T&K gear out in the field and on hunts and have absolutely fallen in love with their stuff. T&K is veteran-owned and 100% made in America, using only American-made products. All their gear is covered under a lifetime warranty with no questions asked. If it breaks or fails, they will fix or replace it for free. T&K is your resource for bino harnesses, bow slings, and a lot more amazing gear. For more information about T&K hunting gear, go to their website at hunting.com. That's TANDK hunting.com. Or you can find them on Facebook and Instagram. Hope you guys enjoy this episode. Don't forget to leave a review. From T&K and the Soulful Hunter, freedom on and stay soulful. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack, and today we are diving into everything archery and arrow building. So I have been in the archery game for a few years, still trying to figure out what it is that I like the best about building an arrow and how to get an arrow to fly accurately and do what it's supposed to do and do its job well. I wanted to go to my best resource that I know that is really dialed in with this, and that is Garrett Weaver from the On Point podcast. And Garrett's going to be on here talking about everything about how to build an arrow and the components and what FOC is, what weights are, grains, all that stuff, and the importance of it. And so we're going to be getting into this. So Garrett, man, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, and it's good to be here. And this is going to be a mad dash, so we're a little tight on time. So we're going to be covering a lot in about 45 minutes. So
yeah, I told Garrett, I was like, we're going to try to keep this under a time limit just for the sake of, because I know archery to a point where I know it can go down a lot of dark rabbit holes. So
yeah, you might have to lasso me a few times and bring me back in, but we will try to stay on track, and I will try to be as short and brief as I can while also giving, good answers.
Heck yeah.
So,
well, you're going to be great because you are as a person and you know your material. So I love it. Just real quick, everyone, mentorship is conservation. This is a part of the why we do it and to pass it on for other people. So we're going to be talking about building your own arrow tonight. Garrett and I have talked before about archery, and when I was actually a guest on his podcast, man, that was over a year ago, a long time. I remember there was a question you asked me, and I don't even think I knew what you were talking about when it came to arrow building, and I was like, you know what? It's time to actually dial this in. So, Garrett, let's actually give the listeners a little background on yourself, who you are, what you do, and then we'll get straight to the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, I'll make this quick. So Garrett Weaver from Oregon, born and raised, basically been hunting my whole life, just like probably most of the people that listen to the podcast. And you might get some of the newer ones because you have the mentorship stuff, the angles. So I've been hunting a long time and really started getting into the arrow building and the bow tuning when I had a failure on an elk hunt. And that really turned the tide for me and started a YouTube channel. Long story short, that kind of shifted into helping people. Learning about bows, tuning, shooting tips, techniques, and basically just helping people learn about their equipment, how to become more capable, what's a good setup, for what animal you're going after, and started the podcast, and here we are.
Bam.
So, there we are.
I love it. Now you're a fountain of knowledge, sharing it with everyone.
I try. I try.
Well, you're gonna right here. So let's get into it. All right. So I'm holding my own arrow, which I built my archery setup for elk. So and obviously I think for those listeners, archery guys who are brand new, there is a different setup if you wanted to go for deer versus an elk setup. Am I correct on that?
My setup encapsulates everything right now. So right now I feel like I could go elk hunting down to deer. If I was going for like antelope or something, I'd probably go a little lighter. But currently I'm using the same arrow pretty much each year for deer and elk. There's nothing wrong with having different setups, but I can run across either one where I hunt. And so I just build my arrow for elk and it'll kill anything else I run into. So,
And that's kind of what I did as well, knowing that I was always going to be archery elk hunting, and then if I ever
right.
got a multi-season tag or whatever, then I could go chase deer with my elk setup as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so when you build it for the biggest animal that you're going to encounter, it'll work for everything underneath it. So anything from grouse to, deer, antelope, anything. I mean, anything in North America, my arrow setup will kill easily. So, and a lot of people's, honestly, a lot of people arrow setups will. So, but we can get into that later in the podcast about what's really what you need and stuff. So I'll let you take it.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about arrow shafts. Let's start at the basis of it. I was familiar and taught that like a 350 spine is going to be what I want for elk. I didn't even understand the difference between like a 250 spine and a 350 spine, and I'm shooting Maxima Red Carbon Express arrows, so they're in the 50s rather than like Black Eagle or whatever goes like 340s or something like that. Talk a little bit about spine and what that means, and then dive into small diameter arrows versus regular.
Yeah, so spine is, and you'll hear a lot of new people talking about this. So spine, you'll hear them call it spline with an L. It's not what it's called. It's spine, and so I hear that a lot with watching new folks and just hearing about it, especially range talk. And so spine is basically the stiffness of your arrow. And why is that important? Because the more powerful your bow is, or the more powerful the shooting setup is, the stiffer the spine you need to handle what you're about to put that arrow through. There's a lot of energy being transferred from the bow into the arrow, and in order to make sure that your arrow is not going to blow up on impact or be as accurate as it can be, you need a stiff enough spine. Or if you're a weaker, shorter setup or something like that, you need a little bit lighter spine. And so a lighter, minus, we're going to just get rid of Maxima right here. They like to do it the opposite for spines. They like to make it complicated.
Well, there you go.
So pretty much, unless you're shooting a Maxima, this applies to you. So basically, we'll start at 500. That's a really weak spine. A lot of kids would probably shoot that. Most of the ladies that I know are shooting a 400. I'll shoot anywhere from a 350 down to like a 280 because I play with tip weights and arrow lengths and stuff like that. So your arrow will react differently based on how much tip weight, how much poundage, length, everything. There's so much that goes into it that just saying a 350 or a 340, while that probably does encapsulate probably 70% of the shooters out there, that's not for everybody.
Interesting. So are you saying like Maxima Red goes opposite?
So so it's really weird. Maxima does their own thing, man. I haven't shot Maxima in I don't know how long, but yeah, I believe off the top of my head that theirs actually gets stiffer the higher they go.
Yes, and that's why I said I shoot a 350 rather than a 250.
Yeah, so that's pretty stiff for a Maxima. Where the break even is there, I don't know. Is it a 300 is equivalent to a 300 in another shaft? I'm not really sure there, but I wish staff, Maxima would get on the page with everybody else and just call a 340 a 340. But that's where they're at. So I guess they want to be different.
Okay, so going back, if you have a long draw length or you're shooting heavy poundage, you want a stiffer spine.
Correct. And so that's very important. And if you have a longer, let's just say you have a long draw and you're only still shooting 60 pounds. Well, you're going to be causing more flex in an arrow. So if you have an arrow and you just take a full length arrow, let's just say you have a 31-inch arrow, a 30-inch arrow, something like that, an extremely long arrow. And let's pretend that you cut that down to 5 inches. Okay. And I ask you to bend that arrow as much as you can. You could probably snap that thing when it's 30 inches long, correct?
Right.
I mean, you could get a lot of flex out of it. Now, if I take that 5-inch arrow, it's going to feel like a freaking pencil. You're probably not even, it's going to be like this pen, man. You're not going to be able to snap that in half.
Right.
Well, why is that? It's because that arrow is stronger and it's stiffer. It doesn't have as much flex in it. And so what you're doing there is you're just trying to match what the dynamic reaction is. And when I say dynamic reaction, your arrow has basically two different spines. So you have a regular static spine, which is your arrow as it sits right here. Like you holding your arrow, this is a static, basically, I think this is a 250. No, it's a 350 rampage. Your dynamic is what happens when it's under duress, when it's being shot, and that's going to be your dynamic spine, and that is what really matters. So unless your dynamic spine is actually properly spined, you're going to have some issues that'll cause accuracy issues. It can be dangerous if you're underspined, and can just lead to a whole host of problems.
And so, for all you listeners who are still trying to wrap your head around the whole spine thing, it's kind of like the torque in a car. The more torque it has, the more power it gets right off the get go. And if it's not under control,
Yeah,
it loses control. So, yeah, okay, so that's perfect. I love it. Now, the next question I have in regards to spine is I know I have a buddy out in North Dakota. He likes to cut his arrows differently so that there's like a larger portion of a spine in a different area of the shaft. Does that sound familiar or something to you, like that you have ever done?
there really shouldn't be much. I mean, no, I've never done that. I'm guessing what he's doing is he's probably. Can you still hear me there?
Yep.
I think I lost you there for a sec. Can you hear me?
Yep. Gotcha.
Okay, so what he's probably doing, he's probably cutting the straightness, getting the straightness. I mean, if he's got a spine tester and he's figuring out the spine across the length of it, then that's what he's doing. But most guys that are cutting off of both ends are trying to get the straightest part of the arrow. And so if you have an arrow spinner, you can find the wobble off of either end, cut that, and then that is basically going to be the arrow that you use. You're finding the straightest part of your arrow. I have a ramped spine actual tester, and that what you're describing there is not part of my process at all. Now, if he's doing that, good for him. I don't know how he would be doing that because basically, I don't know how he would be doing that. That doesn't sound correct to me. But
well, that's why you're on this podcast and he's not. So sorry,
well,
Jeff.
I mean, if you think about it, if you're testing that far from the tip, you're going to get a different reaction than versus if you're testing towards the middle because you're going to have more flex, right? So it's going to be stiffer up here. So that doesn't really make sense to me. I'm guessing he's cutting off the straightnesses, or some arrows are called dual spine. I think Maxima actually does a dual spine arrow, or a quad spine, or whatever they want to call them. But for the most part, no, that doesn't sound accurate.
Okay, perfect. Then moving to the next question, maybe this should have been the first question, is why are some arrows better than other arrows? And we're not even talking brands, just like why do they make an entry-level arrow versus one that you want to use for hunting or target or whatever?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So I'm gonna cap off spine real quick. Spine is the most important part of your arrow, period, for accuracy. I don't care straightness. I don't care. Spine is accuracy. You can just etch that in your brain. If you have spine consistency in your arrow, that arrow will fly and it's 0.003 versus a 0.001 straightness, which we're talking like the diameter of a hair. I mean, it's so close. If you have a really good spine consistency out of 0.003, you will outshoot anybody that has really crappy spine consistency with a 0.001 straightness. So spine is king when it comes to accuracy. And what you're going to get with higher end arrows is you're going to get better straightness, which toss that out the window. I don't really care. I can barely outshoot a 0.006 to a 0.00 or a 0.006 to a 0.001. I can maybe tell the difference. It's extreme. You have to be an extremely good archer, like professional level, Levi Morgan level archer, to outshoot the straightness of an arrow. So what you're getting with higher end arrows, you're getting a better straightness, and we're talking literally a 0.003 to a 0.001. And then you're also going to get, hopefully, if you buy the right arrow, you're going to get more spine consistency with that arrow, and that is a very, very big factor. So those are going to be two of the biggest things. You're also going to have probably better components that go with it. Knocks make a huge difference. Components make a huge difference, and a lot of these most popular arrows, well, we'll just use an Easton Axis. They come with hidden inserts, right? I mean, that's what they come with. You can even upgrade that by adding a different component system. But long story short, a lot of these higher end arrows, let's take a Easton Axis 340 versus a Easton Axis Pro match grade. 340. I don't know anybody. I don't personally know anybody that's going to outshoot the difference there. I've tested them side by side. You're paying more, and I've tested the spine consistencies. They're the same. You're paying more because they're throwing more arrows out of the batch that don't make that point, that extra little consistency. You're getting a little tightly tolerated, or a little bit tighter tolerance, there it is, of an arrow that I don't think anybody's going to outshoot. And I like Easton. I love Easton. I've shot him for years.
So making it fun and lighthearted, it's kind of like Coors Light and Keystone Light, or Busch Light and Bud Light. Is that like you got your beer, it's all going to do the job, but some of it's going to be a little more expensive and taste a little better than others.
It's basically it's a great way to make extra money on almost the same arrow.
Love it.
That's what it
Okay.
is.
So that's really good. So when I was buying my arrows from my very first setup, and I was like, well, the guy was like, my bow shop was like, well, you could go with some Carbon Express Hunter arrows. I was like, well, what do you shoot? And he's like, well, I shoot Maxima Reds. I was like, then set me up with those, because I told this guy, I was like, set me up exactly what you would use in the Elkwoods. And so he set me up, and I've had success. I've enjoyed what I've done. And so I'm not going to go back. But at the same time, it's like there's a big price difference between a high grade hunting arrow and your medium, box store shelf arrow that you could find anywhere.
Yeah, there's a huge difference in when you're getting from like the Beam and ICS hunters. No, I know tons of guys that use them Beam and ICS hunters. They're cheap, fairly cheap, and they well. I mean, they're a standard diameter, but they shoot well. I like micro diameters because I think you're getting more bang for your buck. And you increase your penetration because you have less surface area that you're having drag against your target. But yeah, there is a difference in arrows, and I personally am not a fan of Maxima. I've never fell in love with Maxima. Does that make them a bad arrow? Absolutely not. I mean, if you've been shooting them with confidence and you have great success with them, then that's what you should be shooting. It really comes down to confidence, right? And so if you found an arrow that you've tuned, that has proven to you that it works, that's what's really important. And so just going out and getting stuck on maybe a FMJ, I see guys do this all the time. Cameron Haynes used to shoot, or still does shoot, FMJs. I have tons of guys here that shoot FMJs because that's what he shoots. They have no idea why. They just pay the extra money. And I personally don't like FMJs. I actually hate FMJs. So, there's a few reasons there that I don't know if you want me to get into, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely a difference in arrows. Matching the spine and getting a good arrow that has spine consistency is the number one thing. So you find that with probably 120 to 160 bucks a dozen or more. So
love it. Okay, so small diameter arrows. Just
okay.
you mentioned it right there, real quick. Let's just cover it. I know that I'm still shooting regular diameter arrows in Carbon Express because the Carbon Express components for small diameter are not that good. And so even though, like you said, a small diameter arrow is going to have less wind drift, more penetration, all that type of stuff, I'm shooting regular ones. Now you are shooting small diameter. What arrow do you shoot?
I I can scan you over here. I've shoot everything. So right now I'm shooting the last 2 years. So last year and then this year I've been shooting Day 6. And they're a micro heavy duty arrow, so they're very thick walled. They have a heavy GPI. And
okay, hold on. What is GPI?
So GPI is grains per inch, which is how your arrow is measured in weight. So typically, a heavier GPI arrow will have a thicker wall. It will be typically stronger than a lighter GPI arrow, like maybe a Black Eagle Deep Impact or excuse me, X Impact or something like that. So a lot of the Black Eagle arrows are pretty thin walled. I wish we were doing a video. I could show you the difference in the walls here. But yeah, so an Axis arrow would probably be like a standard thickness, but I like shooting. I think it's off the top of my head. I forget what the diameter is, but it's like a 204, I think. I might be wrong on that, but they're pretty darn small. And if you just think about it, is it easier to shove a needle into something, or is it easier to shove a pencil into something? I mean, that's basically what you're doing there.
Right. Right. And so small diameters actually only came on the scene not too long ago, right?
They've been around. The Axis have been around for quite a bit, and then the injections have been around for quite a while. So they've been around for a few years, quite a few years. But the standard, the old aluminum arrows were pretty giant. I mean, like the XX75s and stuff like that. I mean, we're getting pretty big shafts. But so any pretty much standard arrow today is smaller than what you had, 15 years ago,
I love
20
it.
years ago.
I love it. This is great stuff, by the way. All right, so let's move on into some of the other things. FOC, you hear it a lot. Forward of center.
God. Yeah, front of center.
Front of center.
Yeah.
What is it?
So that is basically the hot topic, right? That's what everybody wants to hear about, and that's the number one question I get is am I being an ethical hunter? This percent of FOC, is this enough to take an elk? That's like the number one question I get. There's a lot of reasons for that. So I'm gonna preface this, and I won't get into the weeds here. I'm gonna preface this with, if you build a good arrow, it's kind of like the Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. If you build a good arrow with good components, the FOC will come. So just build a good arrow, and that's really FOC in a nutshell to me. Now, what FOC is how much weight is front of center of the arrow. So I see you balancing your arrow there.
Yep.
That would be the front. That would be the front of center. And it basically is what percentage of that is front of center. And so you'll hear anything from, I know guys shooting 9%. I built arrows that were 5% on purpose just to see what they did versus a 24, 25% FOC arrow. A lot of guys that I know that are absolute killers that have hundreds of animals under just their belt. So they don't care. They don't care about it. They don't worry about it. I build mine, and a lot of my guys that I know that have really dug into it are around 14 to 15%, and that is with good quality components and 125 grain head. And I'm going to tell you right now that you're better off. You're better off worrying about other things. I mean, FOC is. Go ahead.
Jumping in here. FOC is pretty much like the conversation in the gun world of like, would you rather get shot with a 45 or a 9mm? Right? Because at the end of the day, you're still getting shot and it's still doing its job, but it's more
right.
Like, is that a correct, like?
Well, I mean, that would be more of like for momentum. So there are some things that do come with FOC, but I think you're starting, when you start going over 15, 16%, you're starting to give away things that you need in your arrow setup. So you're either going to go way heavy and you're giving up a lot of trajectory, or you're giving structural integrity to some point. Because if you're getting a really high FOC here, like I have some cheetahs over here, some Aerotech cheetahs, and I think that's what they are. And you don't have to put much in them to get like a 19% FOC, like hardly anything in them. But they're super brittle. Why? Because they're super thin-walled. Why? Because their GPI is garbage. Like it's so low. And so you're either going to give up structural integrity, and a lot of guys don't want to give up trajectory. And when I say trajectory, I say speed, because then you're going to be shooting a 600 plus grain arrow in order to get that 25% FOC that a lot of guys are trying to get to, 20% FOC or extreme FOC. And I bumped mine up. I've shot anywhere from 8 to 19, 17, somewhere in there. And I've got pass-throughs at deer at 72 yards with 10% FOC. And I've had deflections on blue wildebeest. I shot with a single bevel, doing everything that they're saying you're supposed to do, right? High FOC, single bevel. And I got deflected. And that was like 14% FOC, 12%. It was an elevated FOC. So I don't, let's put it this way. I've dug really heavy into the arrows. I'm still forming my opinion about FOC, but I don't feel like if I've ever hit an animal, dang it, I didn't have enough FOC. I would have killed that thing if I would have had a higher FOC. That's never been uttered out of my mouth. So, or anybody that I know that kills or harvests a lot of animals, that just doesn't come out of their mouth.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, it was something I was never really that into or cared to know about. I just knew that at the end of the day, is my arrow flying to where I want it to go? Because at the end of the day, it's all about where you put it, right? So
It is 100% shot placement. A lot of guys are going to disagree with what I'm saying, and I think I've been actually part of the issue. Not to get stuck on this, but I've been part of the issue trying to dig in, and just find the perfect amount of FOC, and just digging in, just diving and diving and diving. And now I think I've, for lack of better terms, moved the needle to overthinking it. And a lot of, I talked to a couple of Australian guys the other day, and they call it freaking overcomplicated. So they just go out and kill stuff, man, and they go out and hunt, and that's what they do. And they're single bevel guys, right? So I wouldn't worry about it to the point where if you listen to the way that I tell you to build an arrow, you'll have a good FOC and you won't have to worry about it.
Perfect. I love it. Okay, so let's move into off-the-shelf arrows with vanes already attached versus an arrow wrap and then putting the vanes over top of the wrap.
Okay.
So the pros of building an arrow and being able to put a wrap on and then put your own vanes is because you can then put a helix on it.
Right.
Either a right or a left twist, and then the helix helps your arrow spin tighter, therefore flying more accurate, correct?
Yeah, it's just think about a top. Like as soon as you spin a top, it's just going straight, right? It's just beautiful. But then when that top starts to slow down, it'll start wobbling all over the place. And so what that does is it helps you. I think it actually helps hide any imperfections in your arrow setup, any wobble, because the faster that wobble is spinning, that tighter that circle is going to get, and you're not going to see it as much. So I honestly think that having a little bit of a helical is great. I shot with a straight vane or an offset for 8 to 10 years, never really cared. And now I'm shooting a 2-degree offset helical, and it works just fine. A lot of the guys that I know that build arrows professionally, they will send them out with helicals. So I think it's a good thing. I think putting a little bit of a spin on your arrow is absolutely important. Is it super important? I'd say that depends on your tune, but I think it's a good thing. And a lot of archers, for guys, if we're just getting nuts and bolts here, a lot of guys that are left-handed shoot a left helical. A lot of guys that are right-handed shoot a right helical. And that's just how they decide that. And
Perfect.
not a lot of arrow manufacturers will fletch with a helical. Only one I know that actually does that, because I actually had him fletch mine because I was too busy to do it, was Brian from Day 6. But there might be some other custom guys out there doing that.
Well, that's good to know. That was the question I was going to follow up with: is does a helical matter based off of what hand you're shooting? So that's good. I love it.
Yeah.
And then 3 vane, 4 vane.
So I've played with both, and I could even probably cut your next question off at the head here. So a lot of this depends on your tune, right? So the more out of tune you are, the more steering you're going to need. And when I say steering, a larger vane. You can cover up a lot of issues with a large vane and more steering in the back to offset the bad steering or the incorrect steering that you're getting in the front. So what a broadhead does, and this is important for vanes, is it steers your arrow in the true direction that it wants to go, right? I mean, if it's pointing left and you're actually aiming this way and it's slightly pointed off outside of your riser, away from your riser, that arrow is going to want to go to the left. And a vane will actually help kind of correct that to a certain point. That's why you have better, easier tuning with a field point than you do a broadhead. And so having more vane and having more steering does help. I've shot 4 vane, I've shot 3 vane, I've shot 2. I just keep going back to 3 because it's what it works. And I also think that depending on the vane that you're using, like the heat vanes, I didn't like those, the Blazer heat vanes.
Mm-hmm.
But with a 4 vane, they shot better than with a 3, and that's because I needed that extra steering. They're so low profile. So you have tons of different vanes out there: shield cut, high profile, low profile, whatever, different stiffness. You're shooting AAE max. That's a great vane.
Yep.
I have the hybrid 26s, or excuse me, the hybrid 23s right here. I've got the maxes right here. I've got the 23s right here, the hybrids. And those are a little less stiff, a little quieter. So depending on how loud you want your arrow to be or don't want it to be, that'll depend on your vane configuration. But for most beginners starting off, a 3 vane, even with a 4 blade, will fly. You don't have to align your blades with your vanes. That is not true.
Okay, so I got a couple questions that popped up within that. So first off, I was shooting originally Blazer vanes on my arrows, but because of just the way my bow was set up and how I shoot. I kept hitting I was blowing veins off as they were hitting the top of my QAD rest.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is going on? Why am I blowing veins off the entire time? And then, I was so new at it, it took me a while to figure it out. And so I switched to a low profile AAE Max, and I love these veins. Big improvement. I feel like they actually fly a lot better now also, so it fits my setup a whole lot more.
Yeah.
Now you said it is a myth, or maybe I'm putting that word in your mouth.
It is. No, it's a myth.
That you don't have to line up your broadhead with your veins.
No. Mm-mm.
Now I was taught that you do, and the other thing is that when my broadheads are not lined up with my veins, it drives me nuts, especially when I'm at full draw and it's on my hand and I can see my veins.
Yeah. Yeah, same here. I, to be honest with you, I line mine up when I have the right component system that I can do that. I'll line mine up too, just because I'm OCD and I want everything to be uniform and it looks good and it's nice and it fits in the quiver. Everything's perfect. But I've shot, if that was true, tooth of the arrow would require four-fletch. Muzzy would have instructions for aligning your broadheads with your veins. Muzzy's been around a long time.
Right.
I've purposely misaligned my stuff. I've shot low profile, high profile, 3-vein, 4-vein. I've misaligned my stuff on purpose with 4 blades. It's just not true. And you'll never see an arrow manufacturer actually tell you to do that, or a broadhead or an arrow manufacturer actually tell you to do that.
So that was a question that I also want to follow up on is, do you match your veins based off of what type of broadhead you're shooting? So if you're shooting a 2-blade, do you shoot 4 veins? Or if you're doing a 3-blade, do you only do 3 veins? Or, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So depending on what style of head, does that dictate the vein I'm shooting? It could. I've shot 3-vein blazers literally every single year. I've played around with others. Actually, no, I take that back. Last year I shot some arrows that Brian made me, and he used some Max Stealths, I think they were, or no, they are AAE Max Maxes, the ones you're using. And so I shot those, and they shot great. But really, I mean, no. If I'm using a large enough head that it's really, really affecting my broadhead flight, I need to look at my bow tune. And if I need that extra steering in the back, I could go to a 4-vein or even a bigger vein. But if you're having to really hide your tuning issues with a vein, you have a bigger issue. You have a tuning issue.
Yep. Okay, good. So next question, moving on, because we're going to just keep this going. There's a lot of questions that are within archery. So arrow speed. I always heard that generally if you can get an arrow to travel between 280 to 295 is like the sweet spot for tuning a bow. Is that kind of, and that's feet per second. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so a lot of guys will start having planing issues at above 300 feet per second, about there. Planing issues. I think it's easier. I think that a broadhead shows your broadhead, or a broadhead will show your tune to you, how good or bad it is, and I think speed will also show your tune how bad it is. I know a lot of guys that shoot. I used to keep mine around 280, 285. That just was my sweet spot. I like the trajectory, and for me as a hunter, I was using fixed pins, and then I switched to a slider, but I kept that same speed because if I ever had to hold over or under, I knew that trajectory of that arrow so freaking well. Right now, I can shoot with a 3-pin from 20 to 60 without dialing.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so it works for you. Most guys I know are around that 280 mark, and that's where they keep it, or definitely under 300.
Okay, cool. And then, so overall weight, the overall grain of an arrow. So I am, and this is getting into a little bit more than just arrow anatomy and all that, but it's always a question that arises anyways. So I shoot a 31-inch draw at 70-pound limbs, and I have a 350 spine. I shoot 125 grain broadhead. I have lighted nocks that are 15 grains, and my overall total weight is 458 grains. And I'm pushing that at like 292 feet per second.
Killer.
Dude, I feel like it just screams. Is Do people really need to know all this stuff in order to just go out there and start killing animals, or at least shooting accurately, consistently?
Those are two different answers.
Yeah.
So, because there's two different questions there. Do you need it to be accurate? And do you need it to be deadly? Those are two different things. And I'm going to say that your arrow will pretty much kill anything in North America. It will, straight up, with the correct head. Now, if you're out there shooting a moose with an expandable at that, I personally wouldn't do that.
No, neither would I.
I think, yeah, I don't know of a lot of guys that would argue that. Probably Tim Gillingham probably would. There's a few other light arrow guys out there, but I think John Dudley might disagree with that. But long story short, you're shooting within you're like most guys. I did a poll the other day or a while ago asking what I don't care about why or anything. Don't even leave a comment. Just tell me how heavy your arrow is. And I did ranges of 50 grain increments from 350 to 400, 400 to 450, 451, up and so forth, all the way up into 700 plus grains. About 50% of the shooters were between 400 and 450.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because that is a regular arrow, standard arrow with a 100 grain head and a standard component. And that is 50% of your shooters out there. And there's people who are going out and getting it done for the most part. Now, accuracy, yeah, you need to know this stuff to be accurate. If you're shooting the wrong spine, you're not going to be accurate, right? We already went over that.
Right.
If you're shooting, I would encourage people that are shooting 100 grain heads, just try 125. You're not going to notice much of a difference. There's definitely going to be a little bit of a benefit there. That's just not even extreme talk. That's just a 25 grain extra head. And that's what I did. And I've never gone back. I mean, I'm not team heavy arrow. I'm not team high FOC. I'm team happy medium, shoot what works. And I'm shooting 475 grains with a 14% FOC. I've killed deer at, like I said, I shot deer at 457 grain arrow. Blue wildebeest with a 457 grain arrow, and all of them got pass throughs. I think I've only ever not got a pass through on. I can't think of an animal I've never got a pass through on, honestly. Right. All the way down to like 412 grain arrows, shooting still 70 plus yards. So that arrow, that bull I killed last year was 81 yards. I got a hard pass through, so my fletchings caught on his skin on the opposite side at 81 yards. I got a pass through a bull's both front shoulders, not the bone, but the meaty part of the front shoulders.
Yeah.
So that's about 5 inches, 6 inches worth of muscle that I went through.
Wow.
I don't know. So how much more do you need? That's going 260 feet per second, by the way. That's not a speed demon. So I don't know if that answers your question, but weight is important. And the more weight you have, the less trajectory you're going to have. So the less, the less forgiving that arrow is going to be as far as being wrong on the yardage. If you use a rangefinder, you really don't need to worry about it. All the animals I've shot after I ranged them didn't hardly move more than 2 steps. So that idea, that scenario where what if you range an animal and then he walks 5 yards? Well, then I re-range him. I don't rush shots. I don't.
Right.
I drove back on a buck right here. I drew back on that buck twice before I shot him. And that's because my pin wouldn't settle.
Wow.
I drew back, held, nope, couldn't do it. Drew back, held, a little bit better. Drew back, held, and I was just getting warm. I think what I was doing is actually warming up my muscles a little bit. You know how your second set's always better than your first kind of thing?
Right.
And I think that's what happened is I was just kind of just warming up, and then on that third pull, punk, and it went right where I was aiming. So, and that was a long shot. I won't tell you how far that was. So that was a long shot. And so, I think that arrow weight is important. I think for your listeners, people that shoot, and I'll go here because I think it's really important. I think that the lighter and slower the weaker your bow setup is out of the gate, so a shorter draw, just a less powerful bow, the heavier you need to shoot. Basically, you need to treat a girl archer, in my opinion, like a trad shooter. I've got lots of friends that are shooting faster than a trad because they're shooting a compound, but they're shooting 420 to 430 grains as a girl with a 100 grain head or 125 grain head, and they're giving up that trajectory to get that extra penetration, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
In case they do make a bad shot, and there's guys, I'll bring Tim Gillingham because he's just super well known. Not meaning to pick on the guy, but he says, well, then you're preparing to miss. because that's what you're doing. You're preparing to miss in case you make a bad shot, you miss the target, you hit a shoulder or something like that. Well, do you bring a spare tire with you when you go on a road trip? Do you're I'm sorry. I imagine, do you bring an extra bow to a bow shooting competition? I'm guessing he does. So you got to prepare for these extra things. And I've taken shots where, you know what, screw that front shoulder. I'm going right through it. And I have, boom, because I carry the momentum and I carry the arrow to do it. And Aaron Snyder talks about shooting through front shoulders all the time with a heavy arrow and a trad setup. Or a compound setup, excuse me. Talks about doing that, about how he's just never had to worry about that front shoulder with a good fixed blade broadhead, not an expandable. He was doing that easily, and I think that's really important.
Yeah. No, I think this is really interesting and a great conversation. I know, so my elk that we talked about on your podcast over a year ago, I front shouldered it, and it didn't get more than maybe 5 inches of penetration.
But it's actually quite a bit for a shoulder shot.
Yeah, and I stuck it like in the meat of the shoulder, to the point where when I field dressed that animal, there was nothing in that shoulder blade. Like, it was just mush. So I was using a Q80 Exodus broadhead, 125 grain. And
love that head.
Dude, it's an amazing head. Just absolutely destroyed the front shoulder. And that bull, because of that, even though I front shouldered him, I was able to get him to stop, and I took another shot at him and double lunged him and got a sweet pass through and stuck in a tree. So there's a lot of, having confidence in what you're doing, especially when you're taking a life, is extremely important. And find whatever you are the most confident in and stick with it.
Yeah. And, a lot of guys have faith in expandables. I am not anti-expandable. I am not. I think there's a room for them in the archery world. There is absolutely room for them. People who can't tune their bows should absolutely shoot a mechanical, because they're going to get way more accuracy out of that. Also, people that are shooting, I would shoot probably a deer with a mechanical, and I probably wouldn't worry about it. I might have a little bit of anxiety because I'm a worrywart. And hopefully that thing expanded. I've tested expandables that didn't expand, and that just scares the crap out of me. So, but you got to shoot what's best for you, man. And I shoot fixed blades because they are much less prone to fail. The failure rate for them is extremely low with a good head. And expandables, there's a place for them, but if you're going to shoot an expandable, I did a test one time. It was crazy how much more energy it sucked up to go through the same amount of penetration to get the same amount of penetration. Like, if you're going to shoot an expandable, you better plan on bumping your arrow weight up probably 100 grains if you're trying to chase the momentum. It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy how much you lose. I bet you have to shoot. I don't know what the number would be on it, but I bet it's 3 to 4 times more energy just to get the same amount of momentum.
Yeah, the energy transfer not going forward and going sideways, and then hitting all that extra mass and slowing it down. Yeah, totally get it. Right. All right, go ahead.
I was going to say, and guys that shoot expandables, God, I feel like I'm picking on this one guy. Guys that shoot expandables say, well, what if you do have a liver shot and then you have that 2 inches of cutting diameter? Well, then you're preparing to miss. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm using your own argument against you.
Well, okay, so I shot. Now this is a rifle, not archery, but I got a good liver shot with a rifle, and I obviously, listeners, we're talking apples and oranges here, but the whole point is I got a sweet liver shot on a bear, and it ended up only going 40 yards and dying. And if I would have done that with the arrow, it would have died. I don't think you're aiming to miss, but just knowing the whole point is like, if you're going to do something, go to be the best at it. Go get good at it. Don't just be like, this getting into ethics, right? We're talking about taking an animal's life. Do you want to willy-nilly shoot every now and then all of a sudden go out and try to take an animal's life? Or do you want to have confidence in what you're doing every single time and being able to just put it where you want it?
Right. I mean, I shoot all the time, and you wouldn't believe how many new faces I see at the range about a month ago.
Right. Okay, so I got 2 more questions for you,
yes,
and
sir.
They're both kind of the same thing, and it's a great follow-up to what you just said.
Okay.
I am a believer that you should be shooting broadheads consistently. And a lot of people will say, well, broadheads get expensive and all that stuff. But the whole point is that if my bow goes out of tune on my broadhead at some point throughout the winter or the spring, I know that I got time to get it back on track before the season starts.
Right.
How often do you shoot broadheads?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I try and hunt year round. So,
Dude,
uh,
that's my goal.
I try. I'm getting really good at finding niche little opportunities here and there to where I need to shoot broadheads year round. And my goal, I didn't get to do that this year, but my goal with the COVID and everything just kind of threw everything out of whack. But my goal is to shoot broadheads any day of the week, any day of the year, and be able to hit what I'm aiming at, because I never know when that awesome, amazing, crazy, once in a lifetime opportunity that you tell your wife about every year, came along, and I got to go hunting this next weekend and go kill a pig in California or access deer in July in Hawaii. You never know.
Right.
And so why not be tuned up all the time? If you're shooting expand or mechanicals, again, you have a leg up on all of us fixed blade guys, because you really don't have to keep on top of your stuff that well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's super important. You should be, for guys that are getting into it, I think you should know and have your bow tuned at least 2 months ahead of time.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yep. I'm a big fan of every time I go shoot, I will at least shoot one broadhead followed up by a bunch of field tips. And that way I'm getting an idea of where my grouping is and the consistency or the flight difference between my broadhead and my field points.
Yeah, they used to have 3D broadhead shoots. I don't know if anybody still does anymore, but they used to have 3D shoots where it was broadheads only. And I wish somebody still did that, because I think I would win.
I love it.
A lot of guys wouldn't. A lot of guys, I bet the winning score would be much less.
Dude, totally. Well, it'd be a lot more expense. People would be ripping through arrows left and right.
It really would be. Yeah, well, probably be a lot of people out there with mechanicals, but yeah, I mean that's a really good point. That's a really good tip. When I shoot broadheads and I'm tuning them, I shoot one at a time, because I put way too much time and effort into my arrows. Everything costs a lot of money.
Yep.
So I shoot one, and then I follow it up with one or two, and then I'm hoping to be close. I don't want to hit the back of my broadhead and chip it with my field point, which I've freaking done before, and it sucks. Or break a blade completely off. So I shoot one or two field points at 50 with prior or following up a broadhead is what I do.
Perfect.
A lot.
Perfect. Okay, so I said I had two questions. It turns out
Yes,
I missed one question earlier, and then I'm gonna end with like the biggest question that can go to be its own podcast at some point. Inserts. So this is going back to the FOC and the overall weight and all that stuff. A lot of people will use like a brass insert versus like your aluminum or different stuff like that, or an outsert. What is the difference and what's the pros and cons?
So that's a really good question. I actually had this conversation the other day, and I'm going through my drawer here, grabbing all my different types of inserts. So this is so you have standard inserts, which basically you'll see like the collar of it coming out to the outer end of your arrow. So like a Beeman ICS Hunter, that's a standard insert pretty much.
Yep.
Then you have hidden inserts, which are hidden on the inside of your arrow, like a Easton Axis. That has a hidden insert, or a injection also has hidden inserts as well. And then you have what would be called a half out, and that is where half of your insert is in the arrow, the part that you actually glue in, and then half of it is out. This is an Easton Titanium half out. That is for a deep 6 sized arrow. It's like a 165 diameter, somewhere around there, or internal diameter, somewhere around there. And that is okay. It's a decent system. Does create a little bit of a leverage point. The standard inserts are probably stronger than and more durable than the hidden inserts, only because you're protecting the end of the carbon there. Once you start having the hidden inserts and you start having half outs, you're creating, and a little bit with the standard, but I haven't seen this issue as much with standards. You're creating a leverage point where now, let's say you shoulder shot an elk. I've got an arrow over here. I'll grab it and show you. you're creating a leverage point where when that arrow hits, it'll snap out of the arrow, and so it just pulls itself sideways out, snapping the shaft in half, and kind of like almost banana pilling, but just basically act like you're grabbing your insert, you're grabbing your arrow shaft, and then you're just gonna like twist it out, like leverage it out,
Right.
and that's basically what your insert will do. So my favorite right now is like a hidden insert with a footer or an outsert, some sort of outsert that goes over the outside of your arrow. So a footer would be basically just a sleeve. You could have a large FMJ diametered arrow where the inside diameter matches the outside diameter of your shaft, and then you can have a actually, here's one right here. You could have basically a sleeve that goes over the end of your arrow, protects that leverage point, and it really beefs up your arrow. I think it's probably 2 to 3 times stronger, at least.
Do you use those more for adding extra weight to your arrow, or do you literally use it just because of the extra strength?
I use it literally just because of the extra strength. It is so much stronger. It is just as strong as probably any other component system I've ever used. I've tested the strongest one I've tested so far, and I'm guessing ethics would be right up here too, but is the day 6 components. The basically it's a half out, and then it has a sleeve or like an outsert that screws on to the exposed part of the half out insert, and basically protects itself. It's its own shell. It's extremely strong, extremely strong. And I tested those versus a footer head to head, and it was very impressive. Yeah, extremely impressive.
Awesome. And then people would use brass if they're trying to add weight. Is that really the only pro to it?
That's the really only reason you'd use brass. You can also do double insert. You can shove 2 hidden inserts or whatever insert you're using, just straight behind each other. You have to know you're going to do it prior to doing it. So with pre-planning and you want extra weight, you can turn a 16 grain hidden insert for a 5 millimeter axis into a 32 grain just by doubling them up. You can do that, and then instead of being at 50, you're at 32. You can also change. You can add a footer, which mine add 15 grains. They're only 1.5 inches long. That's all you need to beef it up. So you're not gaining that much with a footer. Elk River makes footers. He's a buddy of mine out of Oregon. Does really good ones. They're very affordable. If you want like a higher end footer or impact collar, you can talk to Bill over at Iron Will. He makes some pretty expensive ones, but they're nice. But yeah, I mean, there's nearly no difference to using brass over a standard insert.
Cool. All right, and then the one of the very beginning questions, and then we'll end with the final, is arrow length. So a lot of people, when I first started shooting archery, I was nervous about my top finger getting in the way of a broadhead, and so I actually left my arrows probably 1.5 inches longer than it needed to be. And then as my confidence grew, I cut my arrow down so that the way I cut my arrows is what I like it just right over top of the riser. Is that the same? Is that what you do?
Mine comes out to the edge of the riser. That is pretty much all, with a caveat here. That is all user preference, with the exception that your dynamic spine reaction is where it should be.
Right.
So that is the caveat there. So if you're worried about that, there's nothing wrong with having an arrow that comes out past your fingers. That's safe. It's safer,
Right.
I'm not worried about it, but I also have 2 scars I could show you on my index finger.
Right. Okay. So there you go.
So that mine comes right. The tip of my broadhead comes directly to the edge of the front of my riser. So basically, where my finger would be laying.
Yep.
That's where it goes. I'm not worried about it. What happened one time is I had my arrow come out of my rest, and so I was at full draw when it came out, and so I used my index finger to pop it back on, and then and then I drew back like pretty much almost just a little farther, and that sliced my finger. And so I've done that a couple times, but it shouldn't be an issue if you're shooting with your finger above above the bridge, then you should probably change your grip.
Right. There you go. Okay. So final question, and this is a podcast all in itself. I know that you've done broadhead testing. I also this summer did broadhead testing.
Yeah.
And I know what I'm going to be shooting. I know what's number 1 in my quiver and the others down the line. We've already said, I don't want to shoot a big game animal with expandables. I'm going to save those for turkeys. have some fun with those bad boys.
Yes.
I think that's a great way to learn archery and expandables.
Yeah.
However, do you prefer, and there's no right or wrong, just give it to me, no caveat, just do you prefer 2-blade, 3-blade, or 4?
I prefer 2-blade with a bleeder.
Okay.
Which some would call that 4. I would prefer a 3-blade over a single bevel.
Okay.
And that's where I stand.
Perfect.
4 blades, fine. I've killed animals with 4 blades, and yeah, they're fine. I mean, but I think you have more options out of a 3-blade, and I think you have the best penetration with a 2-blade traditional style. But you need the extra bleeders on there to produce more consistent blood trails.
Perfect. I love it. So I have killed animals with the Q80 Exodus. Love them.
Love that head.
They fly accurately. They
Yep.
are super tough. They're not a cut on contact, but that front, I don't know, whatever that material is, it's almost sharp enough that it is kind of like a cut on contact.
Yeah.
So I did broadhead tests this summer where and I only took the broadheads that I was interested in.
I'd say that's what I do.
Okay, so I'm not like going to the store and being like, oh, I'm gonna try some muzzies or I'm gonna try some of this. I took the Q80 Exodus because I love that head and it's proven.
Solid.
I've always really been interested in iron wills.
Solid head.
I love the Day 6 Evo. I think that is phenomenal. And then Annihilator broadheads. Those 4 are like the ones that I really had my eye on.
Yeah.
I know my bow's tuned. I know I've been shooting a lot. The iron will, I hated it.
Really?
I could not get that arrow to fly consistent and accurate out of all those broadheads.
Yeah.
So for me, that was the bottom on the list. I also didn't like. Have you shot iron wills then?
Yes, I have.
Did yours rust?
That's yes.
Yeah, I couldn't stand that.
So with that head, you need to take preventative measures to prevent that. So like a good mineral oil or some sort of coating.
Put some Vaseline on it.
Yeah, something. I mean, a lot of guys use mineral oil, and that is a caveat with that head. Rust is the enemy of sharpness, which is part of the enemy of bloodletting and penetration. So,
right.
But very, very good head. To be honest with you, I have 6 iron will or 6 day 6s rigged up. The Evos, regular Evos, 125 grains on the end of my hunting arrows right now. I'm using an iron will for practicing because it shoots the same as my Day 6 does currently. And so instead of doling my Day 6s, I'm using my iron will for target practice.
So that's funny. So I would always go Q80 Exodus. I got no problem with those. I think you can buy replaceable blades. I highly support those broadheads. I wanted to try 2 blades, and the Day 6s came available to me before iron wills, and I was like, dude, they're accurate, they're tough. And so then when I got the iron wills, I was expecting the exact same thing, and it was horrible. And then here's this like Annihilator, like outlier. I freaking love that head. I love it. Have you shot it?
I've tested it. So was it last summer? I think it was last summer. So not this summer currently, but last summer we shot, I think, close to 50 broadheads in a broadhead test, and it was the biggest broadhead test ever performed. Most comprehensive broadhead test ever performed. The bro guys and I performed it together.
I watched it,
and that was actually for me, that was a question mark. I'm like, I like the idea. I don't know how it's going to perform, and it was probably in the top 25% for me out of 50 broadheads. They are extremely tough. They are cast, so they're not made of out of an extremely expensive metal. So you're not paying, astronomical price for them. They're easy to sharpen because you can take a flat file and it's just easy.
Yep.
And the only thing which, the guys that are pro annihilators will say, well, that's the point of them. They hit really freaking hard. I mean, they hit really hard, and traditional minded guys are like, that's not good for archery. But if you look at the design of the Annihilator and their mindset, it does exactly what they say it should do. It hits really hard, creating that hydrostatic shock, and then pulls blood out quicker. Whether it does that or not, tested it, but I can tell you it hits like they say it does, and I think it probably does a lot of what they say it does. It's extremely durable head, and it penetrates way better than what you'd think just by looking at it. So
Totally. So I saw it in action. I was able to. This is going behind the scenes, people, for all the stuff. Doug, our mentee from our spring bear hunt, we haven't let this cat out of the bag, but we were able to take him on his very first big game hunt where he shot his first deer, shot his first big game animal. And I had him put an Annihilator broadhead on it because I wanted to see what it would do. And his deer did. And it was a doe. It was a doe blacktail, which, not a very big bodied deer, but it didn't run very far. I mean, it went down very, very quick.
I saw a pig shot with those. A buddy Bob shot one with those. He made a good shot. But pigs are freaking tough, right? So it went like 200 yards uphill, and didn't produce much blood or anything. But I mean, that's not really a fair animal to gauge that head on. It got a pass through easily, but it wasn't. It was like, it wasn't a huge hog or anything. But I just heard when it hit it. I'm like, holy crap! Like that. I've seen quite a few animals killed with a bow, and I've never heard that sound. And so it's really interesting. I think it's a good head. I would have no problem putting it in my quiver and shooting an elk straight up.
It is so all you listeners out there, the Annihilator is in my first position on my quiver.
Nice.
Yeah, the Day 6 is number 2, and the QAD is number 3. The QAD and Day 6 Evos, I feel like could flip-flop either way. But just because I want to see what the Day 6 will do, I bumped it up in the quiver. But no, Annihilator is what I'm shooting this year, and it turns out, ironically, this is like 6 degrees of separation to Kevin Bacon. So I really was interested in Annihilator broadheads. I went down to the Western Hunt Expo, went and talked to the guys at the booth. It turns out that one of the owners, Brandon, I would have graduated high school with. He's originally from the state of Washington.
Oh, okay.
Like, we would have gone to the exact same high school. He knew my mom. He went to the middle school that my mom worked at. And I was like,
the guy. I've done a podcast with Brandon. Super cool guy. I like the people behind the product. I think that they have a good product, and it's better than a lot of the broadheads that you see coming out. And kudos to them for thinking outside the box. I think they came out with a really good head. And I actually tried getting my bow hunting partner to use one this year because I wanted to see personally an elk shot with one. But he couldn't get his hands on any, and so I steered him towards Exodus, and so he went out and bought a pile of Exodus heads, and that's what he's going to shoot this year.
Yeah, dude. So, Exodus, once again, well, any of those 4 that I listed, you can't just go into a store and find them. You got to plan ahead and make sure you know where you're going to go get them at. So.
Yeah, the one, I will say one caveat to shooting a bunch of different heads. So different heads, how do I put this? So a lot of guys, and this is going to be the unpopular opinion of the podcast among a few others that I've already stated, but so you and I've known this for quite a while. I was talking to a buddy of mine the other day about it, and he was like, yeah, I totally agree. Is basically you can't expect every single broadhead to shoot like the same out of your bow, even if your stuff is tuned. Not every broadhead will shoot, even though it can shoot like a field point. There was a year where I did side by side comparisons of 5 different broadheads at like 60 yards, or might have been 80. I forget. Anyways, all of them except one would hit inside basically a toucan or a little bit bigger than a toucan sized group. And the one that didn't was a Muzzy trocar. Great head. Good head. And, does that mean that broadhead doesn't fly like field points? No, that just means with that particular tune, that broadhead was not flying like it wanted to. And so that's a whole rabbit hole. But just because your broadhead doesn't shoot, can you still hear me there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so just because one broadhead isn't shooting with your other broadheads doesn't mean that it's a bad broadhead. I mean, Iron Will is one of the best broadheads on the market. I don't think anybody could disagree with that. So why wasn't it shooting right with your other broadheads? And there was just something about the tune that it didn't agree with. Maybe whatever it was, um, it just was shooting different. And if you look at them, you can't expect a helicopter to fly the same as an F-16 fighter jet, right? I mean, they're just two completely different things. So why would you expect a four blade, non-vented, to shoot the same as a kudu, which is almost a field point? So
Right.
I mean, you can't make those, or gobbler guillotine, game over. That's like a freaking giant head. So you can expect that to fly like field points, and so you can't be too hard on heads. I've tested, like I said, we did a broadhead test where we tested 50 different heads and head or anything, and so that test probably wasn't the fairest for all the heads, but um, I think people need to take that in consideration when they're testing multiple heads.
Yeah, totally. And the thing is it's all in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah,
I'm not trying to change my tune of my bow to shoot a certain broadhead. I'm going to find what broadhead I like the best that fits with what I'm shooting.
yeah, yeah, and that is 99% of the way people do it, and the way people really should do it. If you're having to take your bow out of whack or do anything weird or funny, there's something going on, right? I bet with a minor tweak you could get that iron will to shoot, but then you're probably suffering the other four, right? I mean,
Right.
something's going on there. So
Totally.
yeah, I mean it's all relevant, and if you can find a broadhead that shoots with your tune, more power to you. And if you're in the process, don't just go out with a super giant two blade head. You're going to make it harder on yourself. That's going to have more of a deviation than a kudu point or like a bone broadhead would. But if you're out there shooting like a like a day 6 Evo X, that's going to be harder to tune than a standard Evo. It just will. It's
Right.
just it's a bigger fin on the front of your vane. It's a bigger steering wheel.
Yep. Totally. Love it. Garrett, you are a champion and a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much for doing this podcast. How can people get a hold of you if they have questions regarding archery, and also tell them about your podcast?
Yeah, so you can get a hold of me through Instagram, On Point with Garrett Weaver. You can Facebook, Garrett Weaver. The podcast is, I sound like a douche, On Point with Garrett Weaver. I sound like I like my name. I really don't. Trust me. So or the YouTube channel, which is aptly named Garrett Weaver. um,
Perfect.
so yeah, if you just search me in the YouTube search bar, I'll pull right up pretty easily. A lot of, we're over 100 videos deep, helping people learn about archery and archery related topics, gear, broadhead reviews, lots of reviews. The podcast is about ready to hit 100 episodes now as well. Anything from extremely beginner stuff to very, very advanced topics that are way into the weeds for 99% of people. So there's a little bit for everybody. And even the rifle muzzleloader, we're starting to branch out a little bit, but mainly archery focused. And we'd love to have you as a subscriber.
I love it. I'll tell you this, I've gone to your content and it's helped me with a lot of stuff in my growth as a hunter. So it's helped me, and what you're doing is impacting lives, and that's awesome.
Well, I really appreciate that, man. I love hearing that, and that is the biggest reason. Trust me, it's not for money. So there's there's no financial gain here really at all. But yeah, it's all for the love of helping people, and I say this quite a bit. On my Instagram handle, it right below it's the description, and it's sharing my passion for, or it's sharing for my passion for bow hunting and helping other people along the way. And I think I can say that I honestly do a good job of that. If you message me, I will get back to you. It may not be instantaneous, but it'll be the next thing, the best thing, next step, best thing to it. So I really do have a good heart about it. I try to help as many people as I can. I try to be as unbiased as I can. And I think that's a pretty rare find out there these days, is finding an unbiased opinion. I'm not on team anybody. I'm on team what works, and let's figure out what works for you.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Love it. Well, everyone, make sure to go check out On Point with Garrett Weaver. Go check out his podcast. Go give him a thumbs up, a like, a subscribe, all that stuff. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot us a DM at the Soulful Hunter Podcast or hit up Garrett as well. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, listening to this episode. Don't forget to leave a rating and a review if you can. I'd really appreciate it. It really helps, goes a long ways in spreading the word about the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Everybody, freedom on and stay soulful. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.